change from, as I said, from being the persuader to the CEO. Before 1997, before we came to office, we had not only been critical of the then Conservative government, but we had been very tough on ourselves as a party. We literally had to reinvent the Labour Party and most of its policies to make them fit for government. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole story of what we did. I can, in any case, recommend a couple of good books. One written by me, The Third Man, the other written by Tony, The Journey. Both of them are still available in all good bookshops. I'll be checking in Abuja later. But read the books if you want the detail, because it will resonate with you, because it's about casting aside old ways of doing things, overcoming internal differences, reconnecting with the electorate and what's important to them, because that's exactly what you are now doing as you enter a new period of government here in your country. When I first went to work for the Labour Party as a young guy in the mid-1980s, we were close to disappearing altogether as a force in national politics. We were badly organised, bound by an inflexible ideology, and worst of all, we were profoundly out of touch with the people we hoped to represent. We had, in other words, to transform our party from what had become an electoral joke into one that people would actually want to vote for. And for this, we needed strategy, we needed policy, and we needed organisation and communications to bind it all together. Not endless communication, either in opposition, but particularly in government. Not endless communication to a point where people begin to wonder, if that's basically all you do, but communication that is integral to the practice of politics. I was the first person in Britain to be dubbed a spin doctor. And I'm not sure it was always meant as a compliment either. But the reason why communications is fundamental to democracy is that it is both the means of convincing people to vote for you and then getting them to keep following you once you're elected. You may know what you're doing. You may know why you're doing it and what your agenda is. But others need to be constantly reminded, and that is the job of the leader and all the leading personalities in the government, singing from the same hymn sheet, reinforcing what each other is saying and doing. Otherwise, people will be left with a sense of tactics the government is following, but the overall picture, the big canvas, will always keep fading if you don't keep sketching it out to remind people and for them to understand it. As it says in Sun Tzu's Art of War, tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. To which I would add, strategy without communications is like a car without headlights. But what about the substance? The substance of what you have to do as a new reforming government? How do you actually start driving that car? I talked earlier about team effort and getting everyone pointing in the same direction, identifying the goals and getting people working towards those agreed goals. But here's the rub. If you talk in general about change, about reform, in principle, believe me, everyone will be in favour of it. It's when you start reforming individual departments within the government that suddenly, when you start pushing that sort of spotlight on individual ministries and individual policies, suddenly there's 1,000 reasons why it shouldn't be there, or it shouldn't be now. The best way to get around this is to take a specific and say, we're going to focus on this specific within your department, within your area of policy, focusing on that goal and building the team to deliver that goal. That's the best way of getting the bureaucracy to move and to change. Take the education reform that we started in Britain after Tony became Prime Minister. We started with one school, a bad, underperforming school, the one with the worst results, about which it was impossible to deny that we should do something about. And then as we succeeded with that one school, we were able then to roll out the same change to more and more schools across the school system as a whole. Suddenly, the 1,000 reasons for not doing something became a good reason for doing it. So concentrate on specifics. And when people say, what about the risks of doing this or the risks of doing that? Ask the counter question always, what about the risks of doing nothing? They are usually much greater risks than those you take on when you attempt change. And the other theme I want to come back to is priorities. You need priorities in what you want to deliver for your country. But here's the challenge. Every day there is some fresh crisis, some media event, some scandal, don't I know, or some personnel problem to contend with. A whole stack of things that get in the way every day of getting other things, the real things, done and achieved. So what happens to your priorities, if you're not careful, is that the world sort of closes in on you. And before you know where you are, you're spending the whole time dancing around from one place to another, putting out one fire in different parts of the forest, but without pursuing what you were put in government to do, which was to bring about that change, to bring about that reform. Now that's why you need to create the mechanism, the means, even while you're having to deal with the odd passing scandal or big event, a mechanism that remains focused on your day job, on your priorities. A mechanism which is whirring away the whole time, an eye that never sleeps. That's why you need such a policy delivery mechanism that you can control, but which you have people working in to do your job under your guidance with your political will behind you, even though you're having to deal with the odd scandal and the odd event, as I said. Now, one other piece of advice drawn from our experience. You will have more goodwill and more authority to do the difficult things at the beginning of your term than at the end. Let me give you an example of another important emerging economy where I have spent time recently. President Jokowi in Indonesia was elected in July last year with huge public support. As a former small businessman with no links to the political elite, he too was hailed as a leader who could transform Indonesia. One of the first things he did after being inaugurated last October was to slash Indonesia's hugely expensive and inefficient yet popular fuel subsidy. A policy decision which had toppled previous administrations and consistently brought people out into the streets. But he decided to do it straight away. When he had that goodwill, when he had that authority, that was the time to move. Now, obviously, when there was a low price of oil, it made it less painful than it might otherwise have been. But it was, as I say, exceptionally well timed. In one act, the new president had demonstrated to his people and to the international markets that he was serious, dead serious about economic reform and was no longer to be underestimated. And the protests on the streets ended up being minimal compared to previous times. Now, as you know, addiction to inefficient fuel subsidies is not unique to Indonesia. Sorry, I didn't hear. I just make the general point. Take advantage of that goodwill that comes with being elected to take difficult decisions that may inflict immediate pain, but are in the long-term interest of the country, and therefore in the long-term interest of the government as well. And what you do in the first 100 days is important. It's symbolic, yes, but it can also have tremendously positive repercussions throughout government and throughout the country. You have a limited window of opportunity to make an impression, to make an impact as a new government. When I look at Nigeria, I would say that your vulnerability is corruption. That's not new to you, but particularly around the oil sector. People in this country seem to be able to do things with impunity and beyond the reach of the rule of law or any sort of proper accountability, let alone the judicial system. And you can crack the NNPC nut, or at least make a start on it, during the first 100 days. And if you do so, you will have built a very strong foundation for what you have to do for the next 4 years and beyond. That's how important it is. I'm straying outside my free field, so I feel this ground is getting a little shaky beneath me. But let me just say this also. I think that ensuring, for example, that all government revenues go into a single government account, as I gather is meant to happen at the moment, would be a very good start. Those revenues from your huge natural resource are so vital for the country and for your future. And I think this would send a very strong message. We did something similar when a few days after we came into office in 1997, we gave the Bank of England its independence to set interest rates without interference by the government. And do you know what? It gave us an instant reputation for decisiveness. It gave us an instant reputation for fiscal prudence. It seemed, quite courageous for a government in its first act, actually to give power away to another entity. And that reputation kept with us for years afterwards. Now, you must also not forget at the outset that there were 13 million people, I think I have that figure correctly, over 45% of the electorate who voted for the other side. Okay? Who voted for the other lot. Mostly in the south, and in the east of the country. Now, let me give you a piece of advice. You need to show the people who didn't vote for you that you represent their interests as much as the people who did. This is what in the Blair period we call big tent politics. If Nigeria is to transform and evolve towards a politics of performance, it's very, very important. It's going to get away from the politics of ethnicity, from the politics of religion, from the politics of patronism, from the politics of cronyism. It's very, very important that the government demonstrates clearly that it is a government for the whole of the country and not part of it. And remember this too, 70% of Nigeria's population is under 30 years old. These young people do not want handouts. They don't want to be pitied as young people. They want jobs, and they want a future, and they want opportunity, and an economy that will give them the chance to thrive, no matter who their parents are or whatever part of the country they come from. They want merit to be king in this country, including the process and formula by which state budgets are allocated impartially and transparently. In our case, we had vested interests, yes, in Britain, in the Labour Party. Our chief vested interests were the trade unions, which had given us funds and much else besides in order to get us elected. So in that sense, we owed them. They were, as some people portrayed them, the puppet masters. But in government, we had to demonstrate that we would govern for the whole country and not for one section of it, and that we wouldn't be beholden to that vested interest that had helped us get into government in the first place. Now, it is not easy, but you have to set the ground rules absolutely clearly from the outset, the moment you get into government. If you do not treat your vested interests properly and objectively, then you will become captive to them. Everyone else will see that that is the case. And that's a straitjacket that you cannot afford to have if you want the country to prosper and if you want the government to succeed. Now, this is particularly true in the economic context. As I know from my experience as Trade Commissioner, there are vested and protectionist interests hardwired into any economy, and that includes Nigeria. They hold back the whole of the business community because the issue for Nigeria, as you know only too well, is the threat of perennial low competitiveness, not the threat from outside competition. So crack this issue of these vested interests who are trying to, keep control of sectors of the economy, keep them surrounded by protective walls to keep out others who want to come into those markets to innovate, to give consumers a greater choice or a lower price. Crack this, in my view, and the growth potential that is unlocked by it will bring more operations, more businesses onshore, back into Nigeria, including local operations too, that run global supply chains. So let me say this in conclusion. Let me say this, if I may, in conclusion to you, and go back to what I said at the beginning about the science of delivery. The science of delivery has to be coupled with the art of politics. Just think. I'm not saying that pursuing reform in government is like jungle warfare or hand-to-hand combat, although I must say